In the hush that follows the last thunder of an old war, there is a forest that has never been mapped, whose canopy cups whole skies, and whose roots remember comets into that green cloud. Comes a man who is not a man, footfalls like the memory of earthquakes, a heartbeat the size of a gun that shook too long in the dark, and the forest feels him as pressure and ache, as a tide of gamma that makes sap shiver. From the oldest bowl, from rings that count not years but vows, the tree being rises and unfolds, and his words are three, and yet they are a library. I am Groot, and the other answers with a sound that is almost a word and almost a storm. Hulk, and thus begins what must become conflict. But first is something like debate. This is the first chapter, and it speaks with roots and rage about what power means, about whether victory is to endure or to overcome. Hulk does not like debates, but he knows weight. He has carried mountains of hatred on his back and thrown them back into the sky. He has been split and scattered, and he has come back because anger wears his name. He has taken the kiss of nuclear fire and eaten it like a bitter fruit. He has fallen from stars and cratered worlds, and remembered only that the ground should not have been in his way. His strength is not a number, not a ceiling. It is a slope that only climbs. And when he remembers the worst parts of himself, he gets stronger simply to survive the memory. Groot is not a number either. He is a pronoun that grows. Cut him and he learns the geometry of the wound. Burn him and he learns to drink light and shadow differently. Take him down to a splinter and he will wake as forest again. Not as the same self perhaps, but as a self that remembers loving the same friends, the same stars, the same childish joy of wind through leaves. And there is a faith in that, a theology of growth that says the world is worth trying again, even if we must be little to begin. Hulk's theology is escalation. The world tries you until you try back harder, and harder keeps happening. Groot's theology is cycle life returns, and return is a kind of strength that can outlast any single storm. They stand under a sky that fogs itself with green breath and damp light, and there is a translator box, half buried in moss, a remnant of some traveler who wanted to hear trees speak. It chirrs and hums and strains, and says in a voice that tastes like leaves, that Groot's three words repeated, inflected, ask Hulk a question. If power is only what breaks, what survives of it when the breaking stops? Hulk, whose every apology has been an impact crater, says without poetry that nothing stops. Not really, and when it tries, he will push. The box clicks and the forest rustles, and Groot's reply is patient. The one who outlasts the push is not the strongest in the instant, but the truest in the story. And there are stories longer than fists, some of which can only be told in rings of wood. Hulk listens and remembers hands that shook when small, remembers being told to breathe, remembers not wanting to become what he became, and anger rises not at Groot but at the sentence of it all, this curse of needing to be more than the last punch, of being asked to keep growing where growth feels like tearing. Groot hears that loneliness, and it bends him, vines making shapes like understanding, and he says what trees say to storms, you cannot live at your peak forever, but you can live again after each breaking. Hulk says what storms say to trees, your again will not be fast enough. The translator whines and gives up on the nuance, because there are winds now, the canopy tightens, the roots draw lines that are both welcome mat and battlement, and the world holds its breath to see if endurance can convince escalation to kneel. They weigh feats because myths respect record. Groot remembers when forests rebuilt after fires, and called that rebuilding victory. He remembers growing a body so tall he braided clouds and shadowed cities. He remembers holding ships with a net of himself, and hearing them purr like rescued animals. He remembers the mercy of shielding small things. Hulk remembers shaking tectonic plates by losing patience, remembers clapping his hands to shear the air, and all the weak things in it, remembers tanking starship barrages, until the guns grew bored, remembers beating gods into remembering humility, remembers simply surviving every plan that depended on him staying the same. The debate becomes geometry. Hulk is a vector, magnitude increasing with every second of opposition. Groot is a circle, radius renewing with every wound. If the measure is who lives the longest across all time, the circle smiles. If the measure is who decides this place, this instant, the vector grins. The forest leans toward its child and could decide the measure by feeding him, by making the ground a choir of roots spun like steel, by painting the air with pollen that dreams men into sleep. But the forest is not judge. The two alone must choose the definition of victory. Hulk chooses the present tense. Groot chooses the forever tense. The sky makes its own choice and opens. The translator's last squeal is ready, but only the leaves listen. What both understand, as the hush cracks, is that stories end so readers can breathe, and that this one will end with the one who can impose a stop. So ends the first telling, where philosophy did not end the fight but drew its terms, and where the terms favor Hulk, because the field is the moment, and the moment is a furnace that rewards acceleration more than patience. And now the second chapter begins without a new line, because the world does not get a new line before battle, it only shifts weight. Groot grows not by inches but by metaphors, his trunk unwinding into a titan whose shoulders are groves, whose hands are a cathedral of knuckles, every finger a liana that can bridge ravines. He does not merely swing, he roots and the ground accepts him, and 1,000 roots divide into 1,000,000 needles that thread the soil, tasting for purchase in case they must become harpoons. From his crown, spore-blooming blossoms burst and cast a storm of seed that are also eyes. He opens his arms and the forest obeys, and suddenly the clearing is no longer a clearing but a web, a living trap that tries to be mercy by holding without breaking. Hulk answers with the oldest move in his book, forward. The first roots around his ankles constrict and the world thinks this will hold. But he hates being held, and that hate is a pry bar, muscles stacking into avalanches, his skin a drumbeat, and he tears the ground like a bad page, launching himself in a roar that is not language, but it is the law of his body, and where he lands heavy, shock spreading in rings that knock pollen into pointless snow. Groot meets him with a wall of himself, bark layering, wet wood flexing, and the punch caves in a cathedral's worth of grain. Sap bursts like efficient wine, and the wall becomes a hand that closes and tries to cage the fist. Groot learns do not trade strength for strength, multiply instead, and in the moment after the punch he is everywhere. 100 spears from the crook of the Hulk's knees, a braid at the throat, a collar of thorns that whispers sleep, and also slices because mercy sometimes needs teeth. Hulk bleeds the way cliffs bleed, as prophecy not as loss. He rips one spear and uses it to skewer another and snaps them both, against his own chest as if snapping a stick to make fire. The thorns bite deeper and the sleep whisper becomes a song. Hulk remembers labs and sedatives, and how he kept waking into stronger shapes. He breathes the poison, coughs, hates it, and wanting to be done, hurls his arms wide in a clap that is a storm. Sound does not carry through a forest like that without learning new crimes. It flattens birds, it wrings water from leaves, it breaks the weak bonds in the pollen song, it shatters 100 roots at 100 points, and for a breath Hulk is alone inside a circle of broken green. Groot regrows as answer, faster now, learning the cadence of Hulk's rage like a drummer hurriedly catching a complicated beat. He rises broader, a living bastion, and he knows the ground is his ally, so he makes the ground hostile to feet. The soil liquefies into root muck, the kind of bog that loves ankles. Hulk sinks to the calf and does not bother with panic. Instead he goes up, legs like pistons, a vertical decision that tears free the bog by bringing it with him, so that he leaps carrying a cloak of earth which he does not wear gracefully. Groot throws himself at that arc, becoming a lattice dome mid-air, a net of trunks and ribbed boughs, closing to slam Hulk back down, but Hulk meets dome with knuckles and makes it rain splinters. The fall is ugly and eats a crater. Groot is already the crater's wall. He tries constriction again, this time with a spiral that will turn Hulk from problem to spindle. Hulk, done with patience, lets go of control and accelerates. Not his body but his anger. There's a color to what he becomes, a saturating green that makes the shadows seem older. The spiral tightens, and then it doesn't, because there is simply too much Hulk. Groot accepts that he cannot contain the vector, so he tries the only answer that is not containment: dilution. He explodes into seed and filament and moss spool, a storm of himself, a billion small fights that know how to drink the damp in air and the salt in sweat. Hulk is suddenly a mountain inside a fog made of fingers. He rips and it means nothing because there is always more touch. And Groot works the millions the way a choir works a note. Little cuts, little sedations, little requests to stop, for a number of heartbeats that would be a lifetime somewhere else. The vector is inconvenienced by the circle. Hulk adapts. If he cannot catch the pieces, he will injure the medium. He begins to strike the air with blasts of movement that are almost too fast for such a large body. Palms flinging slabs of wind, shins kicking gales, each impact making a pressure shift that peels filaments out of their dance. He pounds earth not to hurt Groot, but to make the ground ring, and the ring drive seed to the surface. In stacks he can stomp into paste, and as the storm of Groot tries to remain everywhere, Hulk makes everywhere hostile by being the loudest thing the soil and sky have ever known. The forest buckles. Lakes in distant hollows find themselves jostled into new shapes. The air becomes a tune of concussion. Groot reforms out of mercy for his fragments, coalescing into titanic self to avoid having pieces die from shock. It is a tactical necessity, and also a gift to Hulk, a target. There are moments in fights where destiny is only a kind of arithmetic. This is one. Groot rises as a colossus whose arms are bridges, whose legs are pillars. Hulk does not slow. He surges up the living pillar, fingers gouging bark, using the very strength of Groot's stance as foothold, and with a bellow like a quarry exploding, he hits the giant's solar plexus with both fists. The impact runs through Groot like winter through a grove. Crowns shed leaves that were not ready to go. The giant bows. Hulk is already higher, grabbing what would be shoulder and what would be head, and he twists with intent not to break a neck. Trees do not have such a neck, but to shear the balance of a whole architecture. They crash together the way continents used to kiss when young. Groot throws him with vines thick as tunnels. Hulk lands with the animal grace of pain and is on his feet before the ground remembers where he is. The world around them is becoming less like a forest and more like a scar that will in centuries be a meadow, then a tail. Groot sees that the field is dying and knows that this hinders him. He tries to pull sustenance from deep aquifers, calls to seeds still asleep 5 miles away, but the present tense certain thing, 3 feet away, is a fist. Hulk hits and hits and hits because he has learned the rule that works on doors and gods alike. Groot drops the mercy from his tactics. Thorns become stakes, stakes become drills, drills become the sort of tool that mines, and he aims not to fell Hulk but to tunnel him, to print holes that will not close, to make the vector into a sieve. The first drill finds shoulder and goes in. Hulk roars, and the roar is old grief. He pulls the drill through himself and uses its bloody length as a club. The second finds thigh, and he breaks it short and leaves the wound to steam. The third goes for the spine, and when it touches bone, there is a sound like a bell, and the bell means you will not. Groot understands that time is slipping his side of the bargain. He throws everything into growth, tries to overspread the field and make a new field on top of the old. A second forest blossoming in a minute. It is beautiful, and it is strategic, and it is late. Hulk understands the new geometry instantly. Do not let the circle complete. He digs both hands into the young cathedral of trunks, wedges fingers until bark complains, and then he lifts. And the lift is absurd because it should take machines all day and prayers all night. He raises 100,000-pound tangle and hammer throws it into the mother tree that animates Groot's main mass. The crash is a syllable of defeat. Groot reels. Hulk chases with a leap that bends the world downward and lands with knees that speak avalanche. And then the fists arrive, a metronome of ruin. Groot regrows eyes and they are gone before they can mourn. He tries one last dispersal, a final seed storm like a nebula shed from a dying star, but the air is a fist now, and it does not permit gentleness. Hulk claps and the birthing cloud collapses into choking tumble. There is no clean oxygen here, only pressure and green dust. Hulk takes one deep breath that tastes like burned leaves and throws the biggest punch of the day at the place the translator once said housed the self, the central will that binds the many to a name. Wood splits, a ring of age is exposed and then erased. The ground jumps twice with the echo. Groot falls as a giant and rises immediately as a grove, and falls as a grove, and rises as a thicket, and falls as a thicket, and rises as a sapling. And this is the proof of his creed. This is the foreverness he promised. But the field is ruined now, and there is almost no water left in reach. The soil agitated and glassed by the heat of transfigured kinetic energy, a plain of grit where roots slide and cannot taste purchase. Groot becomes a fist-sized twig that quivers and tries to learn breathing in dust. Hulk, whose rage is not blind but purpose-built now, kneels and puts his hand over the little trying, not to crush life, but to declare the round concluded. The hand is a mountain, and no sprout can push through it. There are no more vines to hold him, no more forest to feed him. Groot's philosophy remains true across centuries. The story will never see, but the measure chosen here was the hour, and the hour is Hulk's. The wind carries after sounds away, and the only standing thing in a mile is a green man who is still becoming. He lifts his hand at last, and beneath it the twig is still alive, because Hulk is not execution, he is decision, and the decision is already made. The battle cannot continue, because only one of them can still make the world move. Groot will grow again elsewhere, later with water and time and music, but not now. The victor is established not by death but by denial of capacity. Hulk stands over the silence and knows it for what it is, acceptance, and something in the slope of his strength. Gentle slows because anger has nothing left to push against. When he leaves he does not leap like a meteor, but walks, and the ground that rearranges itself to remember his steps is the book that will tell it plain. Escalation beat endurance in the narrow window of a fight, and the forest after a long sleep and rain will one day teach the coder that endurance still returns. But today's ending belongs to the one who could not be contained. Hulk is the winner.